Welcome to the Mobiography podcast. Today I'm talking with international best-selling author and smartphone photographer Joe Bradford. Hi folks, Andy here from Mobiography magazine and welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking with international best-selling author and smartphone photographer Joe Bradford. Now, if you haven't come across Joe before, she's an award-winning fine art photographer who lives on the rugged Devon moors in the UK. She has been making quite a name for herself over the past few years using her smartphone to capture the stunning landscapes around where she lives. She is a speaker and has given presentations and workshops on photography at conferences like MojoFest in Ireland, as well as the photography show in Birmingham in the UK. She is also the author of the best-selling book Smartphone, Smart Photography, and has just published her second book, the follow-up to that first one, Smartphone, Smart Photo Editing. So in my chat with Jo, she talks about how, as a professional photographer, she started using her smartphone to take photos. She outlines the approach to successfully completing a 365 project and talks about the release of her new book. So, without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Joe Bradford. So, hello, Joe. Thanks for joining me today. You okay?
I'm good. Hi, lovely to be here.
So we've met a few times, well, once before. I think it was about 2018, wasn't it?
It was.
MojoFest. You're a professional fine art photographer, and over the past few years, you've made a bit of a name for yourself in the iPhone photography space. So first question, tell us a bit about yourself and what your photographic journey has been like.
Hi. Yes, we did meet a couple of years ago, a bit longer than that now. And rather than just iPhones, I do smartphones. So I do both smart Android and iPhone devices. So just a little correction there to make sure that no one feels left out. We are all inclusive these days. I've been taking photographs all my life, and I've been lucky enough to have access to darkrooms in my childhood. And I still actually have a colour darkroom that I print from now. So I'm a proper photographer that does it in darkrooms and also has lots of big digital kit. But I have a real love for photographing with smartphones, and that's something I've been doing very enthusiastically since about 2015. And back then I started my career as a smartphone photographer by doing a 365-day photo challenge where I took a picture every day for 2015 and loved that experience. It was amazing, thrilling, terrifying, and extremely strenuous, but worthwhile. And ever since then, I've kind of forgotten to take my big cameras out, and I do still make fine art in my darkrooms that I sell in galleries all over the world. But on a day-to-day basis, my camera of choice is my current phone, which is an iPhone 13 Pro Max. But I'm not afraid to pick up an iPhone 6 or a Huawei or whatever else comes to hand and take photos with that. I just think it's all about taking photos and not so much about what the devices that you use.
How did you find the 365 project that you did? Because I've attempted it myself over the years and failed quite miserably. How did you keep motivated with it?
So I kept it really local, and I think that was one of the things is that I realised afterwards that possibly the best and the worst thing about it was that I gave myself a theme, and the theme was that I was going to take pictures of my neighbourhood for the full year. And that was all very well until my mum turned 70 and wanted to have a party in London. And I had to basically fit in a trip to London around photographing my neighbourhood. So I took a sunrise photograph, caught the train to London, spent the day with her and the night with her, and got home by the middle of the next day to make sure I could still take a picture before it got dark. Much to the annoyance of the rest of my family. And actually on that subject, my family used to call it the tyranny of the 365 because it would be a bit like Groundhog Day. I'd go through this whole process of getting the best picture I could get each day. And it would sometimes be an absolute epic. And what was supposed to be 5 minutes of creativity at the beginning turned out to be 4 good hours of driving around looking for something I hadn't already photographed or looking for inspiration And I live on Dartmoor, where it's can be quite bleak and moody, and the weather can be quite miserable sometimes. And so some days it was really challenging. But, I had that kind of Groundhog Day thing where I'd get to the night and I'd think I'd done a brilliant job and go to sleep relieved, and then wake up in the morning and think, oh, no, I've got to do it again. But one of the things that worked for me was planning. So I bought a copy of the Ordnance Survey map for my neighbourhood. And by neighbourhood, I mean Dartmoor, which is 368 square miles. So it was a pretty good area to explore, a good sized area to explore. And what I did was I looked for every single interesting point on the map. So anything that looked like there might be a photo there. So I looked at rivers, I looked at geographic features, I looked at architectural features, and archaeological ones as well. Dartmoor has loads of stone circles and ancient sites from lost habitations and all sorts of things like that. So there were lots of things I could stick pins into the map. So I bought a load of black map pins and filled the map up with black pins from one end to the other. And then every time I took a picture, I'd put a white pin in. So if I'd replaced a black one from one of the places on my map, and some days it would just be the view out of my window or over my gate, because I had a 8-month-old baby and a 1.5-year-old baby. So some days it was very difficult to get out. But the using the map meant that I wasn't struggling too much about where to go. I'd just drive or walk to one of the locations that I'd pre-selected and then see what was there. And the more time I spent doing it, the more aware I was of which times of day worked best for which photos. And I think it kind of just it sort of flowed. But they were really difficult, really challenging days. And one of the best things about doing it and posting my daily posts on Instagram was that I connected with a community of #365 type communities on Instagram, and everybody was very supportive of each other's attempts to take pictures, and people would buoy you along. And if late afternoon had come and you hadn't posted, they'd be saying, I hope you've taken a picture. And so that kept you going. I also had about 100 followers on Instagram at the start. And so I insisted that my parents and my friends and my siblings and everybody come and sign up to Instagram so that they could kind of keep me going and join in my daily adventure while I was on maternity leave with my son. So, and the other thing was actually that made it really exciting was it was a great thing to do as a stay-at-home mum with my children during this period of being at home on maternity leave and having nothing else to look forward to on a daily basis, but just being with my kids and loving them, which was absolutely wonderful, but didn't fulfill my creative needs at all. And having been a professional photographer for about 20 years at that point, I kind of felt like I needed to address that part of of me, not lose complete track of who you are as a human just because little pink screaming babies turn up in the world. So the point of doing the 365 was to give me 5 minutes of creativity every day. And actually it was my sanity, but also my insanity, depending on how well the day was going. So, but I did really enjoy it. As I say, the family said it was the tyranny of the 365, because some days it would be like, what are we doing today? Well, we're taking a photo, everybody, let's go. But my kids and I had the most amazing adventure walking the wilds of Dartmoor. I'd have my son on my back in a backpack carrier, and I would try and get my little daughter to walk, or I'd carry her on front. I had no room for big cameras. I literally only had room for the things that you need when you have kids with you. So nappies and changes of clothes and all that. So no room for cameras and lenses. It was literally just my phone in my pocket and me in the elements with my babies. It was amazing. I look back on it now and think I'd love to do that again. But at the time I was so relieved. I was literally on my knees crawling into New Year's Eve on the last one of those. I was so glad when it was over. It was an absolute epic.
I've tried it myself and I've probably lasted about a month and a half. And then I'll probably miss a day. It's fine in January, but once you get to February and there's 28 days in the month, you start to lose track of what photo goes to where. And
yeah, I think what worked for me was I'd take the photo and edit it there and then. And then I'd upload it at 7:00 on the dot every night. So I'd put my kids to bed. They were very little, so they'd go down for their evening sleep at 6:00. And that would give me a bit of time to get my head together and sit down at 7:00 and post. And by having that ritual of doing it every night at 7 when I had a bit of private headspace, it worked because it kept it kind of flowing, but it also meant that people were looking for it at 7:00. So people on the other side of the world would message me and tell me afterwards that they'd look at this lovely picture of the moor every day as they had their coffee at breakfast time. And, it was kind of a ritual for not just me, but lots of other people. And those people messaging me all the time and thanking me for their daily picture of somewhere far, far away kind of helped keep it going. But I also really firmly believed, there's a really naff old movie with Kevin Costner in it where they say, Field of Dreams, where they say, if you build it, they will come, about building a baseball pitch and people turning up and playing on it. And I felt like, in a way, my photography on that project was a bit like that, in a way that as long as I turned up and went outside with my camera, I always did find a photo. But the thing that was hard was getting outside with my camera. That was the bit that was difficult, was actually making it out the door. And once I was out there, something always turned up. So, and I often used to sit there and think to myself, wow, I see, it was worth coming out. But it was the bit about getting out that was difficult, that motivation to leave the house on rainy days, or, all the bits that make it hard.
Always the way. Do you have a favourite time of the day, year, season, or any sort of particular weather types?
Let me think about that. So I do really like photographing in the early morning light. Now, I'm not really a morning person, but in the winter, you get to see the sunrise. In my part of the world, I can see the sunrise at about 7 o'clock at this time of year. And it means that I'm already up and getting the kids ready for school. And then as I wave them off, I can see the sunrise over my gate, and I get amazing light. So I'd say probably early mornings in the winter is a great time. And weather-wise, I really like stormy weather. I love where I live. I'm particularly interested in taking weather photography anyway, because we're really battered by the weather. I live on a hilltop, really high up in the national park. I'm off grid, not connected to mains electricity in Dartmoor National Park. And I've got these expansive views in every direction from every window. And it also means that I can stand out in my own garden and watch storms coming from miles away. And kind of, those moments where just as the storm clears, or as it just is approaching, you get these really moody, dramatic shots. And I kind of look out for those sort of scenes. So stormy, moody weather and winter and early mornings. I never thought those would be three things I said I liked, but actually in some weird sadistic way, I think I actually do. From a photography standpoint, they work brilliantly. From a personal one, maybe not so much, but yeah.
I suppose if you sort of live off-grid, isolation with the COVID pandemic has been pretty easy for you. How has COVID time sort of affected your photography and what you've been doing?
Well, it's really funny. When it first started, I mean, COVID itself isn't funny at all, but when they started talking about locking everybody down, I realized that I'd been training for this for years, because I have a studio in my house and I live off miles away. I'm 3 kilometers from my nearest neighbor. I'm miles from anywhere. And I've joked for years about all I needed was to have a moat round my house, and I was ready for the zombie apocalypse. And when the whole COVID lockdown thing happened, I just thought, I'm okay with this. I can handle this. I'm used to working in my pajamas. I'm used to rolling out of bed and rolling into my studio. I'm quite happy having my children at home with me, because I've got an acre of garden that they can play in. And around, my only neighbours are horses and sheep anyway. So we were okay going outside our gate for our daily walks and things, and doing what I always did anyway. Nothing really changed, if I'm honest. My mum lives in Spain and my dad lives in Wales, so I already FaceTimed them regularly. Even that was old hat to us. But yeah, in terms of how it changed my photography and not just my life, I think it made me more grateful to be somewhere that I was, and kind of reminded me again why I'd done that 365 project. In fact, that I'd been really, really into showing people my neighborhood and just exploring my own neighborhood and engaging with issues and visions and views that were in my own neighborhood. So I'd spent many years working as a travel photography, editorial type work, and there was this point during the 365 where I really enjoyed this realization that it was more exciting and interesting to take pictures on my own doorstep and explore what was familiar to me. And I think during lockdown, I became really interested in kind of doorstep environmentalism as well, about looking at what all my native species were that grew and lived in my garden, and looking at the cycle of life that occurs between, plants over the course of the spring and summer and autumn and so on, and looking at biodiversity in my garden. And I photographed all of these things as well, and was really interested in the kind of environmental aspect. And I really enjoyed using my phone for all of this, because it felt like quite an environmentally friendly way to be making work as well, rather than the old process and analog photography that I've been known to use as well. So, and on that note, I'm also very interested in using old smartphone kit and kind of exploring the ways that old digicams and things like that can still be used and made to work in an interesting way, so that we don't have so much e-waste going around. That's an area of interest of mine. But yeah, so for me, lockdown was all about a lot of introspection and thinking about my practice as a photographer, and thinking about how important it was to love where you live and make images that, reflect the beauty of your own surroundings, or the interest. It doesn't always have to be beautiful, but interesting and appealing, or, whatever. As long as it's engaging or intriguing in some way, then it makes for an interesting photo, doesn't it?
Today, you've just released your second book. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm assuming a lot of that came together during lockdown times.
It did. I was just going to say, I started lockdown without a lot on. I was just finishing up a load of work for an exhibition for a show, and my publisher approached me and said, "Do you want to do another book?" And I'd always said I wasn't going to do another book. And I thought, hey, it's lockdown. I've not really got much on. What shall I do a book about? So I'd already been doing workshops with the Royal Photographic Society, where I'd actually written a course, a full one-day course for them that I delivered in person on smartphone photography. And I wrote another one for smartphone photo editing. And I decided that the best way to write that course would be to use Snapseed, because everyone could use it on any device and it was free. So it was the most democratic piece of editing software that I could come up with. And I think we only managed to deliver one in person before it became an online course due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But during that delivery of it repeatedly at the beginning of lockdown, when my publisher approached me and said, what do you think you should do? The first thing that came to mind was that when my first book had come out, people had said, why did you only spend 3 pages at the end talking about editing? Where's the rest of that information? So that had been the course that I'd written, and it just made sense to turn that course into a book, because I'd already prepared all the material and I'd delivered it multiple times. So I'd kind of pressure tested it repeatedly on an audience. And, I had all these questions and feedback from all the people that I'd had the course for. So it was actually a really pleasant book to write, because I already knew what my market wanted and the market research was in place. And I just had to deliver on a written version of my workshop. But I really love writing. I love writing. So it's something that gave me great pleasure to do.
I suppose it's worth probably just mentioning that this is the second book. The first book was called Smart Photography.
That's right.
How many years has that been out now?
So that's been out for 3 years. It's had it's got one new edition. So it's the original book launched in April 2018. So some people have got the original cover, and there's a newer cover that came out at the beginning of 2020. And that book, Smart Photography, is kind of just a step-by-step guide to photography. It's basically a photography textbook, but I decided that if I wrote it on smartphones, it would mean that everybody could feel like they mastered photography without having to think too much about it. And that's been really successful, that book, actually. It's still, I checked this morning, it's still in the bestsellers list. It was nice this morning. I looked and both my books were inside the top 15 on Amazon's digital photography list. But Smart Photography was the first smartphone photography book to ever top the digital photography category on Amazon, which I felt like was a nice bit of history for us smartphone photographers, that we'd got in front of all the Tom Angs and the Michael Freeman digital photography books. And I was up there with my smartphone photo book saying, hey, look, we do this. My new book is the companion volume to this. So Smart Photography only had 3 pages in the back that mentioned editing. So that was the bit that needed expanding. So Smart Photo Editing, which is my new book, is basically the expansion out into a full workflow for editing on any iPhone or iPad, basically. Or sorry, any phone, smartphone or iPad.
Is Snapseed one of your go-to apps then? Do you use any other editing apps?
Snapseed really definitely is the one that I would go to on my phone. I think it's there's a lot of apps around and lots of people have different preferences for their editing, but I just really love how much you can do within one app. So I use that. I use the visual supply company's app, Visco's. I'm never sure if it's Visco or VSCO. That I always get different answers from people on that one. But anyway, that's another app I really like.
I say Visco. Filtered.
Yeah, I say Visco too. That's fine. We'll stick with that then, shall we, Andy? So I really like Visco's filters for black and white conversions. I use lens distortions a lot as well. That's another app I really enjoy for kind of adding light effects, and retouch for the retouching part, and screw it. So there's a lot of other apps out there that I like. But what I love about Snapseed is I can get a really strong edit just on my phone in the moment and stick it on my Instagram and not think anything more about it. But in terms of mobile, the only other app I regularly use is a mobile app on my iPad as a mobile device rather than my phone, and that's Affinity Photo for iPad, which I also absolutely love.
Is there a typical sort of editing workflow that you follow, or depends on the photograph?
Actually, no, there is quite a prescriptive workflow that I follow, and it doesn't need to be like that. But my workflow kind of evolved out of my work as a darkroom photographer first and foremost, and a darkroom printer. And then I translated those skills into my I've had Photoshop from the very beginning. And every iteration of that came out with more advancements, I'd kind of adapt to it. But my workflow essentially over all these years, 25 years of editing editing photos in either dark rooms or on digital software, has always remained the same. And that's kind of, starting with the basics like correcting and straightening horizons and perspective and all those kind of things, doing cleanups. And then I work on to more things like white balancing and color correction and things like that, and so on and so on. But I should say at this point, the way I laid out my new book was to specifically lay it out as a workflow. So the first 3/4 of this book is walks you through step by step my workflow in the same order that I would usually do, and kind of encourages you to do it in those stages so you don't have to backtrack on yourself and do things twice. And the last bit of the book shows a load of case studies where I show a picture from beginning to end, and show you the whole phase of how I've edited it from beginning to the finished piece.
What would you say the common mistakes people tend to make when it comes to editing?
I think the most common mistake people make is just overcooking everything. So in fact, if I had a point to make about the way you edit it, everything should look as subtle as possible. So I always think that the minute that the photo looks like it's being worn by its edit, that you've gone too far. So I like to think of the edit as basically being a nice bit of varnish that you put over an already beautiful painting, rather than trying to correct a photo that's kind of just okay and make it really look amazing by making it extremely saturated and extremely contrasty. So the two things that you notice most are people turn the contrast up too much, and then you get those really awful kind of halos between dark and light areas where it's often caused by usually contrast, but also over sharpening your images, and also just being aware that most smartphones the algorithms in smartphones tend to oversaturate work anyway. So your photos come back looking highly saturated. So if you start putting more punch into them on top of that, they always look a bit fake and unreal. And I'm quite interested in my pictures looking more I like them to look beautiful, and I like the light to be interesting, but I don't like things to look too overcooked. So where possible, I think being aware of the mistakes of oversaturation and also over contrast. But be aware that the first thing you might have to do is to just reduce the saturation as the phone shot it, if it looks a bit fake, especially in the greens. Always on the grass, it comes up a bit much on Androids particularly. So that's always a good place to start to dial that down a bit and then see what you're left with.
What's your approach to composition of your landscape shots?
So it's funny, I've always considered myself to be a huge rule breaker and not a rule follower at all. And I always think I'm so out there and different. And I remember in my 20s, someone really talking to me about kind of composing on the rule of thirds and offsetting things, and realizing when I went back and overlaid a rule of thirds grid over all my favorite pictures, it turns out that I was completely obeying the rule of thirds compositional ideas, when actually I thought by offsetting things to the side, I was being really different and unique because everyone else stuck them in the middle. But actually, I was obviously just not looking at brilliant photos to start with. But I do find that things flow better when you kind of offset your offset the point of interest to one side or t'other. And there are obviously a few rules to bear in mind, that you don't if you have animals or people in the pictures, that you have them looking into the empty space in the frame rather than have the empty space behind them, and again, if you can try and avoid having things breaking the edges of the frame, it makes things feel a bit more comfortable. So trying not to cut off people's tops of their heads or one elbow or just a bit of a foot or something, which never feels deliberate. If you're going to do something like that, cut it off hard, go at the knees, go at the neck, but make it look like you did it on purpose.
Hard.
Yeah, exactly.
A while back, you used to run some regular workshops. I take it COVID sort of put pay to all those sort of activities over the past year.
They did in person, but actually I've been triply busy online. So interestingly, what was a kind of once or twice a month workshop thing in person ended up being a 3 or 4 day a week of full days of teaching online. I've never been so busy as I was during lockdown. So I was delivering a range of workshops for the Royal Photographic Society, and it was the first time they'd ever done any sort of mobile platform photography there. And it was quite a hard sell to their members, who are all quite die-hard proper photographers with big cameras. And so the first few courses didn't have many people on them, but now they're all full all the time. But I do courses through the Royal Photographic Society. I offer things through all sorts of groups, so community groups from the Women's Institute and camera clubs, but I also work with sort of, young carers and children that are excluded from school, and teenagers that, who have difficult living situations and things like that. So I kind of tap into all these little groups and run creativity workshops, which are about finding your own creative voice and discovering what it is about makes you tick as a photographer, and instantly makes you a better photographer when you're photographing the stuff that you know and understand and like. So that's my probably best-selling workshop, which I deliver. But then on top of that, there's photography and editing ones on an array of platforms. Yeah.
Where would people go to if they wanted to find out more about the workshops?
So you can look on the Royal Photographic Society's website, where there are a load of courses for January online now, and February, in fact. So there are a lot of courses for January and February online there. And you can also come to my website, which is greenislandstudios.co.uk, or come through my Instagram, which is @GreenIslandStudios, and you'll see I've got links in my bio where you can come through to the website, and then you can either book onto one of the courses that's on there or make inquiries, because I do run one-to-ones and small groups, either online or in person. I take photo walks and I kind of do bespoke courses. So if someone just wants to learn one specific thing and they only want to come for half a day or a full day, they can come and make a request. I've got a lovely studio manager called Lois who handles all my inquiries, and she'll happily guide you into what works best. And we often do a lot of gift voucher sales as well, actually. So people buy a half day or a full day workshop with me to give to someone as a Christmas present, which is always good fun to have.
If anyone was looking for a good Christmas present this year, where can they find your book? I presume Amazon's going to be the first place.
Yes, it's on Amazon, but other booksellers do exist. So in the UK, you can get it on Waterstones or any number of independent booksellers as well. The little bookshop in my local town has got copies in it. So Dogbury and Finch, if you're anywhere near Oakhampton. But apart from that, you can get it in Barnes and Noble. You can get it in bookshops all over the world. Actually, it's pretty much everywhere where you can buy English photography books. You'll find a copy of my book tucked in there. And if you do, please pull it out and face it forward on the bookshelf. Finally,
have you got any plans for next year?
Funnily enough, I am just finishing up my third book this week. So book 3 will be out in August, and I'm in discussions with some publishers about book 4 at the moment as well. So that's keeping me busy. I also lecture in marine and natural history photography at Falmouth University on the BA photography there. So I do that a couple of days a week, which I love. I really enjoy doing that. And there's always little projects in the pipeline.
The number you have called has been disconnected.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Joe. If you want to find out more, I'll put all the relevant links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review in your favourite podcast platform. And with that, stay safe, have a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next episode.